so complex that I either had the choice of doing a 14-hour-long presentation with about 300 slides, or just subjected to very, very quick 10-minute one. And my colleagues pointed out that actually a 14-hour-long presentation is torture, so I decided to go just for the 12-minute one, I promise. So, as I said, it's a very, very complex issue, so instead of disaggregating it and talking about 3 different issues, I decided actually to focus on the link and on the nexus between peace, profit, and prosperity, or what actually happens when things go quite wrong. So, this is the ideal picture. The link between these 3 is actually not of causation, it's a link of mutual impact. And I don't think anybody in this room disagrees that when things go right for everybody, things really are going right for everybody. What happens when things actually go wrong? When you have conflict and actually companies are losing money and there's a lot of poverty. I put up the definition that we use for the sake of this presentation. Conflict, by conflict I will mean armed conflict, but I also mean like civil unrest and community. And what can they actually do for peace? So what happens in this horrible nexus of evil, as I decided to call it, just for the sake of conversation? Basically, there's 2 questions that this picture brings up to me. Businesses many times claim that war is actually doesn't affect us that much, we're not losing out that much money, and peace, whether there is peace, sure it matters, it's really nice for the society, but I'm not entirely sure whether it matters for business. So 2 questions. How much does war cost for businesses? And how much does actually peace cost for businesses or for other actors as well? These are, I'm sure some of the business people in the audience will be able to identify with this. These are just types of cost of conflicts. Some of them are direct, impacting on your own operations, and some of them are indirect, impacting on the country around you, or actually these are lost opportunities that you can be making money, but you're not because there's conflict going on. Some companies can actually put very, very good figures on these, especially if they're multinational companies and have operations in conflict-affected countries, but also in countries that haven't been affected by violent conflict. It's difficult for us to understand and to know what these costs are, because companies don't actually like to give these numbers out for very understandable reasons, or companies just very quickly absorb the costs and then move on, trying to mitigate the risk that they're facing. What happens though if you're a national business? You were born in a conflict-affected area, you're a Palestinian farmer growing strawberries, you know the conflict, you don't know anything else, that's what you live, that's your life. So you don't actually even understand what are the costs that you're incurring as a result of the conflict. If there is nothing you can do about your own conflict, or there's nothing that anybody else can help you to deal with your own conflict, maybe it's not the best idea to go. Peace. This is a very, very difficult one, because this is when all of us pull out our crystal balls and start gazing into the future and say, great, how much does conflict prevention cost? It's very, very difficult to put figures on it. However, people who know and understand conflict and peace have managed to do that with 2 countries. The Shell example that I have there, that's a very, very interesting example, at least for me, as a peace practitioner, because a company was facing community unrest, and they realized that that unrest will cause 10 to 15 days delay. And therefore they decided to engage in community dialogue and in social project, and actually managed to avoid that cost. And I think, putting the 6 million figure as opposed to the 50 million figure, that's quite a compelling argument, at least. Is that even though you have all these businesses understanding what are the costs of conflict, and even though there is quite compelling evidence on a local level, but the global field is in level. And I can probably already hear some people whispering, yes, what about the Chinese? It's a very, very fair point. On a local level, if an ethical company is working in a conflict-affected areas, it will still save money in the long run. On a global level, Chinese companies going to Sudan, Chinese companies going to Burma, or companies going to Turkmenistan, that's a big question, I think, for everybody to deal with. And this is a very, very small publication that is meant to show to businesses that there are already cases and evidence against companies who have been sued and had to pay a lot of money even though they settled out of court. That means that the awareness to the fact that companies are violating human rights, especially in conflict-affected areas, is growing. But unfortunately, compliance with national laws and regulations isn't enough, especially in situations of violent conflict, because sometimes there aren't any. The international community started getting its act together with all of us, about, 10 years ago, and started to come up with all these voluntary initiatives. Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, voluntary principles, etc., etc. And everyone will talk about the Kimberley process, which is great. And whoever can guess which of these are fake ones is going to get a free copy of the red flags towards the end. So let's say you're complying with everything. Everything is in order, working fine, but you still have a massive violent demonstration outside your gates. Why is that? Because every single conflict country that you go to as a business, you will face risks that the conflict is posing to you, but it also will have an impact, no matter what you do, no matter how much you comply with the national laws and regulations. Take, for example, this case. You're a new company moving into a conflict-affected area, you want to hire people, and you advertise in the national newspaper because you really want to be transparent. What happens? Nobody locally has the skills, therefore all the workers are going to be, for instance, from the capital, possibly from a completely different nationality or completely different tribe, and therefore you exacerbated an already existing conflict. This other example is about security, but it's a very, very similar case. Basically, no matter what happens, there will be an impact, positive or negative, we don't know, that the company will have in a conflict-affected area. My colleague decided to refer this to as the mother-in-law principle. For instance, take for example a small family and there's a family argument. You do know that if the mother-in-law is coming for a visit, her visit will have an impact on that argument. It can be good, it can be bad, but there is definitely going to be an impact on the family argument. And imagine a big company moving into a conflict-affected area that's almost like a mother-in-law that actually never leaves. Okay, so let's say you're complying 100% with rules, regulations, you're part of the Kimberley process, EITI, anything, you're mitigating your risks and the impacts that you have, then and only then we say that your business practice is conflict sensitive. And that's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is common sense. It means understanding the risks and impacts that your operations have and that you incur because of the conflict, and then incorporating that understanding into your business operations. And it's quite important that you incorporate them into the core business operations. It sounds simple. The process of doing it is very, very complex and quite long, but it can be done, and we've been working with companies, especially in Colombia, and especially from the extractive industry who have been doing this. So let's say you're doing all this as well, then and only then we would advise for the companies to start creating positive value, whether through core business or through social investment or indeed through public policy dialogue. So these are the types of things businesses can do, starting from compliance, moving into conflict sensitivity, and creating a positive value. The one example that I would actually like to bring about a company, actually it's a network of businesses that have been creating positive value, and in this case specifically positively and proactively contributed to peace building. That's from the South Caucasus. And it's a network of business people called the Caucasus Business and Development Network. Basically, it's business people who decided to get together and produce cheese, produce wine, or produce tea. And why is this contributing to peace building? Because the branding on these all three is called Caucasian. And it's Turkish, Armenian, Georgian, Azerbaijani, etc. business people from the non-recognized entities, all promoting the same brand. Means what they get in return is sectoral cooperation, they get a platform for advocacy and lobbying, they get new markets that they wouldn't get any otherwise. What we as a peace-building organization and the society get in return is a joint identity. They're promoting a joint identity that is above their own national identities, which is fantastic. I mean, it's the only network in the region that survived last August conflict, which I think is very, very significant. and especially because we're talking about the business network. So this is just one example of how business people can create positive value while they keep making profit, because they get a lot of advantage from this as well. Now, to our favorite audience, which are the policymakers, and I think there's only a few of them in the room, but I'm not going to go through all this because I'm really quite interested in having the discussion, and I put the source down there. It's from the Global Compact website, so all of you can actually go there and look at it. These things have been said and done so many times before that really policymakers could increase accountability. Sure, all these norms that have been created through the Kimberley process, VPs and other initiatives, they're very important. But companies cannot implement them on their own. They really need the governments and the international financial institutions along their side. Same thing with conflict sensitivity. We have it and we developed it for the extractive sector. What about other sectors? I think those principles need to be adapted to other sectors as well. And there is a lot of good policies already that, DFID or other policymakers have on aid, trade and investment that could be adjusted in a way that they incentivize business who is conflict sensitive as opposed to businesses who are less ethical. I'm going to leave it just there, just really briefly, and looking forward to the discussion.
Just one more second.
Yes.
You stuck to your 12 minutes, so the clock has stopped. She has a bet that she wouldn't be able to keep to 12 minutes. Some of what you said applies just as much to Bournemouth as it does to Burundi. Is there a sort of threshold, or are these so universal that you apply them wherever you are? And how do you know when you're in a conflict situation or not?
Okay, there's two dimensions to it. One, yes, it applies everywhere because you can get conflicts everywhere. However, if you're talking about violent conflict, if you're talking about situations where you have potential human rights abuses and violations, your business has to be extra careful and make sure that you also comply with international humanitarian law, and you also have to be extra careful when you're analyzing your context. Example, if you're in Bournemouth, what is enough if you do community consultations because you know that the council already agreed and everybody agreed to you being there. Okay, you have everything, you did a checklist. If you're in Iraq, it's not enough that you negotiate with the Kirkuk Regional Council. You do need to understand what is the national situation, you do need to understand what is the geopolitical situation, and you do need to understand how is you being there going to have an impact on all of this. So it's really looking at conflict as something dynamic and changing over time and making sure that you connect all the dots. And it's this type of difficulties that businesses face mostly, because most of the people who go there, especially the first ones, are the security people and the security managers, the economists and the engineers.
All right, and my other question is related really, which is that there are some terms on there which I just wonder whether there is backup on. I mean, the Equator Principle's fine, but, quote, conflict impact assessment. Is there a manual I can pick up somewhere?
Yes.
And there was something else on there which was conflict-sensitive procurement standards down at the bottom.
Basically, okay, so this is the conflict-sensitive business practice guidance. This is not really a toolkit. This is a set of ideas, a set of principles, and more of an ideology on how to think and what kind of questions to ask if you're a business company operating in a conflict-affected area. It doesn't actually tell you exactly how to do that. On procurement, it's just the same idea. It's really incorporating conflict sensitivity, which is analyzing what kind of risks and impacts there are in the society if you're hiring people.